When he was about 17, Carl Laemmle emigrated from Germany to America to kind of start a better life. His brother had already come over. He arrived in New York, but eventually settled in Chicago, and basically for about 20 years was like a bookkeeper. And at about 36 years old, this is like 1906, he wants to start his own business. And what I think is first initially an idea to do retail stores, to basically make malls, he instead decides to invest in kind of the new thing of the time, which was Nickelodeon. Pretty shortly after, it was sort of an arms race between him and Thomas Edison to create the ultimate motion picture company. First starting his own studio, Independent Motion Pictures, IMP, which would eventually furlough and transform into Universal Film Manufacturing Company, and then later Universal Pictures. And for that matter, Carl Laemmle's career goes back to the silence. He kind of had his hand in pretty much every Universal release right up to maybe like the mid-20s, somewhere around 1926, 1928. He kind of handed off the business to his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., who was the studio head until 36 when they sold the company. But Carl Laemmle and Carl Laemmle Jr.'s foothold in Universal's legacy is unmatched. More to the point, Carl Laemmle Jr. was so invested in making Universal a genre destination, more specifically a horror destination, producing essentially the best of these. We're talking Dracula, we're talking Frankenstein, we're talking The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Old Dark House, and Bride of Frankenstein. If I recall, the Laemmle family was really tight with the Chaney family, Lon Chaney, who played the Phantom of the Opera, and Lon Chaney Jr., who was the Wolfman. And so I think there was sort of like an indebted thing to like, let's provide a space for the man with 1,000 faces to have 1,000 faces. I think what's important about Carl Laemmle is that movie making was so deeply embedded in them that though the bottom line was something else, they were willing to take risks, which eventually didn't pay off. Like, that's the reason they had to sell the company. But you can't understate that everything they did came from like a scrappy place of wanting to make a good show. This isn't your Ted Sarandos studio head. This is someone who's trying to make great movies. And I think that's what pays off in the end. Because though the Laemmles didn't have any stake in Universal, that was eventually what the bread and butter was. That's the thing. We need art making not for the opening weekend or even for the opening run. We need art to be made for 2 decades from now, because that really ends up being the most impactful stuff.